No pun intended, episode number 62. I'm very excited today. Our guest is National Master Sam Copeland. He has a peak FIDE rating of 2198, 2 points shy of 2200, a peak USCF of 2310, and currently he is the head of community at chess.com. How are you doing tonight, Sam?
I am doing really, really good. I'm looking forward to talking with you, Matt, and I'm just excited to be here. I hope it's a fun show for the audience.
Yeah, I was super excited when you agreed to come on. Unfortunately, we don't have Jesse tonight, but that means we can also say bad things about Jesse throughout the podcast. So that's kind of exciting too.
Okay, fair enough. I will probably hold my opinions back, but chat, go nuts.
Nice. Okay, Sam. So first, because you're such an accomplished chess player, I'm curious. How old were you when you started playing? Can you tell us a little bit about your background as a chess player and kind of how you've gotten all the way up to the level you're at now?
Yeah, so my story is actually fairly unusual in that regard. I feel like my dad did teach me like the basic rules when I was maybe 6 or 7, but I don't think I knew like how to castle or anything until I was like 10, 11. And I found some chess books at the library. I've told this story before, but I was into just a lot of reading. Like the library was my favorite thing when I was a kid, and I would read like Sherlock Holmes or other mystery novels and Hardy Boy and Nancy Drew. And then I found like puzzle books and I was like, "Oh, well that's fun. I like these different kinds of puzzle books." And I remember I was looking for Sherlock Holmes. Like I was on the terminal at the library. I searched Sherlock Holmes and I read all the Sherlock Holmes books and I found Sherlock Holmes chess puzzles by Raymond Smullyan, which like some really dedicated chess fans might know. And my recollection, it might be, I don't know if it was the first chess book I'd ever read, but my recollection is that was like one of the first ones. And it's retrograde analysis, which is like really complex chess problems that are super not normal. You're trying to figure out like what happened to get here, and then am I allowed to castle in this position or not? Because I can calculate that I had to have moved my rook because of like 10 different conditions or something. So it was a really weird introduction, but then I discovered that. And then there's like other chess books on the shelf, and there were like 50 chess books. And I read like everything they had, like Eric Schiller, a
Yep.
lot of Eric Schiller, you know, and just all kinds of game collections, just scrolling through and Reinfeld's like 1001 Brilliant Ways to Checkmate and such. So that I did over like the next 4 years. And I really, really wanted to get into like a tournament or a club because I was loving all the chess stuff and I had no one to play with. I was just
Mhm.
absorbing chess books and had no one to play with. And it's like 2000, so the internet isn't really there yet. I can't type in Columbia Chess Club. Now I would find it right away.
Right.
Eventually, I don't remember, like someone mentioned chess or something to my dad, and we discovered that at one of the city parks, they had a chess club. And we started going there, and then I managed to get into tournaments. But my first tournament was, I want to say I was 15. So I was already in high school. And my first rating was 1722, which is like crazy high for your first ever
Wow.
rating, you know? So I skipped like all of the traditional scholastic stuff just because I couldn't find it or anything. And I remember I dropped back a little bit after I got that first rating into the 1600s. And then I just kind of improved a bit from there. I was like 1800 when I went to college, and I went to UT Dallas, um, where John Bartholomew, Dimitri Schneider, a lot of other great people went. Eric Hansen, though he
Mhm.
was after my time. And I was studying geographic information systems, but I kind of walked onto the chess team because I was below 2000. Like I'm not representing the
Sure.
the chess team in any serious tournaments, but I got to play with those guys and slowly improve. In college, I crossed 2000. I went to grad school in Buffalo, New York. And after I got married, I had a bit more opportunity to compete and I started doing some more tournaments and I inched up from 2100 to 2200. I remember I was so close to 2200 for a while. And when I was a kid, I never thought I'd make national master. Like it's unusual to make it like after college, you
Right.
know?
For sure.
Um, and I just felt like I'm actually kind of getting there. And so like I was super motivated, but I was hovering at like 2190 and 2185 and such for a long time. Like I remember I went into two tournaments that I did well in, and like if I won the last round, I would have won like $1,000 or something and gotten national master. And then I came up short with a draw from winning positions, like twice in a row at like Cleveland Open, Marchand Open, and Rochester. And then like things broke through. I had like a small tournament. I inched over 2200. I hit master. And after that, I shot to 2310. Like I immediately gained like
Wow.
another 100 points. Like I had been, it was like a little bit of a dam holding back. I went to one tournament, the Columbia Open, which is where I live now. And I remember I went 5 out of 5 against like four experts in an IM. And I gained like 40, 50 points in that one tournament and some other things. I had like a significant streak there that pushed me through to my peak. So that's kind of a significant part of my journey up through at least NM, and that was an exciting and gradual process that was surprising to me every step of the way.
I mean, I'm really impressed that you started at 1700 because I think a lot of younger players now don't appreciate that, back like you said in 2000 or earlier, if you were one of the strongest players at your school or in your area or at your club, it was really hard to find competition. You weren't just going online, firing up, 100 blitz games a week on your iPad. It just you couldn't find people to play. So it sounds like at UTD at Texas Dallas, you kind of got immersed with those super strong players that got you to that 2000 level. But I'm curious, what was your training plan like? Did you have sparring partners or coaches that helped you get to the 2200, 2300 level, or were you doing all self study at that time?
I have never had a training plan.
Okay.
So for those who are watching, uh, who are looking for maybe more structured improvement tips, that's never been something that was a strength of mine. Um, I just absorbed chess because I love it, right? Like I mentioned, I read like all 50 to 100 books at the library, just everything I could get my hands on. I would go every, week or so, take back all the ones I'd read, get all the ones I hadn't, and just keep going through everything on the shelf and rereading in some cases. Um, obviously for some things you have to be more structured. So like for openings, I would find a book and I'd work through it. And back around like 2000, I literally had a notepad where I like wrote my own version of like MCO.
Right.
Like I'd have multiple pages and I'd get a hole punch and I'd put it together. And that was my opening repertoire, was done in pencil.
Hmm.
You know, I think even for players who've been around in 2000, like no one was doing that. That was very weird.
Yeah.
But I did my opening repertoire in pencil, just writing down all the lines, which actually was really good in terms of remembering it. Like, that process uh, was compelling. But in terms of like getting better at tactics and end games and all of those things, I just absorbed content as much as I could because I loved it. Um, and I went and played as much as I could. Maybe as much as I could is a bit strong, but I mean, certainly was playing regularly through college, and both online with some blitz chess, which wasn't as much my thing, but just rapid games at the Dallas Chess Club and any tournaments I could get into in the Carolinas and all of those things. So just getting out there and competing. So for me, that was it: consuming chess content and going out and playing. Um, Obviously, there's study, but the study was just always what interested me, like going over my games and things like that. I can't say that I was very intentional about it because, chess has given me a lot in life, which I love, but I was never going to make it as a professional player,
Hmm.
which most people aren't, right? Like we're both masters, getting improving at the game is rewarding because there's a little more depth I can enjoy, but there's no real difference for me between having a peak of 2310 or 2350 or 2400. It's not like it unlocks
Right.
something massive. So it's always been about just the competitive joy, the joy of the games and the unique positions and all of those ideas that exist in chess.
I'm happy to hear you say that because I think, you know, I get caught up a lot looking at data or training plans and different things. Like, how do I make things efficient and maximize your rating gains and all of this stuff?
Yeah,
But really loving the game, I mean, you look at the kids that are improving really fast, you could say, well, it's because they're young, they learn quicker. But it's also
yeah,
because they're playing chess probably 5 hours a day. They have the time to do it and they just love the game. And I think that's something where, as adults, we need to figure out how to get that same passion. How do we just get curious about chess and want to consume chess all the time? Whether it's play a blitz game, read an opening book, write your notebook openings down by hand. Um, One question I had when you were talking about that is, did you use an engine back then? Like, were you using Fritz version 5 or any of those kind of
chess
crafty?
master.
Yeah.
uh, Through high school, I don't know if I used an engine before college. Probably in late high school, I had some access to an engine. I don't remember what it would have been. I remember um, I took like I never really had a chess coach, but I remember taking some lessons online with International Master Boris Kryman. Um, and I remember he showed me how to locate games in ChessBase. I wanted to learn the French defense, and one of the things I remember was he just recommended the games of Evgeny Boreev. And I just went through and I looked at everything Boreev was playing, and I picked a lot of those lines, which honestly is a really, really good way to do things.
Uh-huh.
Maybe not as much today because the way that opening theory has evolved, like top players are playing so many different lines. But in the 90s and before that, players would be known for they always play the French defense or something like that. Or they have a couple of openings. It was like MVL always plays the Nydorf and the Grunfeld. And there were a lot of players you could study like that. And so picking a model player was really effective. And I remember I had some I think I used like the online chess base or something back then. I don't remember if I had much access to an engine. I don't think it mattered much. Like
Yeah.
what Brea played at that time was much more relevant to me than, what the engine said because they weren't that good at openings yet. And okay, they could point out some blunders, but that didn't really matter to me. You know, um, I think it was more in college that it started to be really interesting to look at games with computers. And I remember at that point analyzing games and crafting like my own version of like Kasparov's migrate predecessors for some blitz game I played where I just got lost in a whole bunch of variations
Yes.
and ideas and things like that. And I go back and look and like Stockfish now just rips to shreds. Like, yeah, I would have used Crafty or other engines like that. And I remember it would point out these lines and now Stockfish is like, that was totally wrong.
Oh,
But
the
at the time
engines,
it felt like truth,
right.
I had a Grandmaster on my pocket or on my laptop. I was like, how could it be possibly be wrong?
Well, the engines were so inconsistent back then too. They would, the eval would really bounce around. Like sometimes they had no clue what was going on. And you were right. At one time, the Grandmaster games were a lot more reliable, especially their analysis post game. Like if you looked at a chess informant, they would come out, I think, like once a month. They would show all the recent
Hmm.
games, maybe every other month. And all the title players would get these chess informant books to study all the openings and the novelties. And you could see, like, here's Kasparov's notes on a game. He'd go through all the opening variations
Yep.
and make those trees. That was way better than anything you would get with an engine. You just couldn't recreate that at the time.
Yeah. I think one thing I miss about engines at that time and maybe up through like, I don't know, 2010 or early 2010s, I loved analyzing with an engine when it wasn't the case yet that it was just giving you truth right away. Like
Yeah.
now you turn on the top version of Stockfish or other top engines and they give you an eval and it's pretty much right. You
Mhm.
have to figure out why it's right, push down some variations, ask some questions and such, but it's pretty much right. At that time, you'd be looking at like a really interesting game, a complex sacrifice or things like this. And you could much more often kind of push it a little bit. Like, what about this sacrifice? This knight sacrifice feels really tempting. Like it's positional, so it's not something you can calculate to the end. And you'd push it and you'd play the knight sacrifice, and it would say it was bad and like you're a pawn worse or something. And it's like, but hold on, a pawn worse indicates some compensation. This looks interesting. And you'd push through and you might find out it's good. So it's like you had this amazing analysis partner.
Yeah.
And now it's like you have God. And
Right.
I kind of liked having the analysis partner better than I like having God. I mean, there are pros to both. Like it's nice to turn on game review and immediately get the satisfaction of, oh, there's the win I missed. Um, but in terms of like just an experience of spending a half hour or an hour going through a game and discovering ideas, I missed that period. Like
Right.
that was a nice period.
Well, it's like we could be more curious with our analysis, right? Like, oh, like you
Mm,
said, what happens if we try this? What happened? And now the engine's just like, well, I've thought of everything. That wasn't one of my
yeah.
moves. There's a reason why. Um,
There was a feeling that I was bringing something to the table, right?
yes.
Like I
Yeah.
had ideas and sometimes they were right, like especially sacrificial lines, like you could push and often the engine would be underestimating some of the positional factors. There were plans that you could push forward that it wasn't appreciating as much, but sometimes you were right. You could contribute ideas, make them work, and that felt really cool. You're bringing nothing to the table with Stockfish now. Like
Yeah.
there's zero contributions I have to the game review process.
When I was in college, my buddy Sean Eaton and I, we played in these, I
Mm,
think they were called freestyle chess competitions back then on ChessBase online. And it was
okay.
essentially everything goes. You could use multiple engines, as many humans as you
Mm.
want. And at that time, so this must have been, I would say 2004. At that time, we were still strong enough that we could use like weaker engines and our own ideas to kind of steer the paths of the games, and other teams could do the same thing. Did you ever do any events like that where you play with the engine against another team?
I don't think I did. I can't. I did play some correspondence chess in like 2014, so it was a later period, and at that point, um, a lot of times in 2014, it was just who had the better machine
Okay.
and could push the position a little more with the strongest possible engine. There was some contributions from humans, but just quality of machine and amount of time you let it calculate on a position was a big factor. And I got smoked in those games. I remember. Um, so I hadn't done a lot of it, and certainly not in the 2004 era or anything like that. I know um, Gerard on our fair play team played a lot of centaur chess at different points.
Okay.
And so that's when you're paired up with an engine, and he's done that. And it's really interesting, but it's a lot of draws,
Right.
is my understanding. Like many, 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 many draws. And then like you break through with a win, and that feels amazing.
Yeah.
But it's a
Frequent.
lot to invest for that occasional payoff.
Okay, so then after you kind of hit your peak rating 2310, was that around the time that did you found like a chess club in South Carolina? Did you start your own club?
I mentioned that I got the master title around when I was in grad school. So I was going for a PhD in geography.
Mhm.
Um, I defended my dissertation proposal, so I was ABD. I had a draft thesis and such, which uh, wasn't very good, but I had it, and was trying to move towards defense and such. Um, but I discovered that I just was getting very disillusioned with academia. Um, the way academia works is if you're persistent enough, which I don't know if I was, I feel like you're pretty much going to get through. And so if you just keep revising your drafts based on feedback from your advisor, and keep pushing through, like they'll eventually give you a PhD.
Sure.
Maybe that's wrong there, but persistence is a big part of it. But I just kept getting more and more disillusioned. I was like, okay, like trying to push through, trying to work on the feedback. I would sit at my desk for, hours every day, try to work on paragraphs in a document that I was submitting to present at a conference or something, and get like 2 paragraphs done and just hate every word. Just struggling with it and feeling like it didn't matter at all. Like I was working on the modeling the spread of infectious disease. Which, when you think about COVID and such, super relevant, or at least it seems super relevant. I'd be reading literature about how you would restrict the spread of a novel infectious disease, and that
Wow.
seems relevant until you realize actually it doesn't matter because people are just going to ignore whatever the health professionals say anyway. So,
Oh, I
you
see.
know,
Yeah. Right, you can't
that's
control it
not
like a
part of the
game.
model.
Right.
Everyone's just like, I'm just going to get everyone to do this thing, and you're not modeling like humans saying, F you, I'm not wearing a mask, or whatever the thing might be, right? So it doesn't, it doesn't consider any of the actual dynamics in the real world, but we would be modeling how it would spread and such. Um, so, uh, I was very focused on the dissertation, et cetera, but I was becoming disillusioned, because I realized I was never going to succeed at like writing in a peer-reviewed context. Like I might be able to chug through, get this dissertation done. Maybe if it goes well, I could get into a tenure track position. And I was like, I'm never going to get tenure. Like, never going to happen.
Yeah.
I'm never going to be good enough at this publishing thing. I don't enjoy this process. And, if you're, you know, an adjunct faculty or other things, like the pay's terrible. And, I just started reading some of the literature about the path and the disillusionment with academia. And I was like, this is not going to work out. And my wife was really not loving Buffalo because the
Mhm.
winters were so cold. And more than the weather, the job that she had gotten up in Buffalo, she was becoming more and more frustrated with. Like she had a bad boss and so forth. And at one point, I remember she came home and was just defeated. And I was like, you know what? Why don't we just leave? And my intention was to finish the dissertation after moving to South Carolina. But I was like, you know what? I got my master title. I'm getting some private lessons as opportunities. I'm teaching online. I'm writing blogs on chess.com. I'm slaving for 2 paragraphs in the office at my dissertation.
Yeah.
But then I get home and for fun, I write a 1,500 word article for chess.com in an hour.
In a flow
And
state.
I get all these reads, and I love what I put out there. And, it feels so much better. And we just left. We moved to South Carolina, and I started teaching in schools. I just cold called schools. It was like, hey, do you have a chess program? And there was no chess programs here. So I started a small business. I called it Strategery, and got into 5 schools that fall. Started doing private lessons and expanded, hired some people. We got up to like 17 schools. Um, it was a really wonderful process. It was nice to do a small business. It's challenging because you're doing everything. You're doing the website, you're doing the finances, you're doing
Yes.
the customer support, and all of those things in addition to actually getting into the schools. But it's also empowering to develop the skills to do all of that stuff. And it went well, but I got more and more opportunities at chess.com. And before long, I was balancing both owning the small business and being full time at chess.com. And then COVID hit and all of the schools shut down. So, like the small business teaching schools, like I didn't have anything. And chess exploded on chess.com and elsewhere. Lockdowns and PogChamps and then Queen's Gambit all led to big growth of the game. And so it was like there's my work at chess.com is so involved that the idea that I'm going to balance this and the small business just isn't going to work when COVID is gone. and we can get back in schools. And I sold the business to David Gramad, who was working in another city in South Carolina, and so he expanded down here. And I've been focused on chess.com since. But before I sold it, we got to over 1,000 kids that we had taught in like 4 to 5 years or 5 to 6 years that we did it, and I'm super super proud of that. And every so often, like I post a TikTok or something, and I get some kid who's no longer a kid
Uh-huh.
who I taught chess at some point, who's like, "Hey, I remember you. You taught me at Center for Knowledge or something like that." And now they're in college and such. And it hits me like, whoa, it's been that long. But it is really really cool when that happens.
I think that's awesome that you found something where, kind of going back to the fun, right? The fun you had playing chess, you were able to take that fun into your career, but then also it wasn't just about you. It wasn't just how high your rating could get. It was rewarding just, being able to help out 1,000 different students. And now chess.com, you're helping millions of, chess players that are trying to get better. Oh, that's really cool. And what was your first role at chess.com then? Were you an editor, blogger, or did you wear a lot of hats? Because you did some videos too, I know.
Yeah. At this point, I've done a lot of things on the content side, at least a little bit. Um, my first role was I was blogging on the site for fun, like I mentioned. I remember uh, writing pieces about like the best Android apps for chess, which like in 2013 or so, like that was a hot topic. And so like there were a lot of searches, and I was like, I bet I can get the number one search result on Google for this. And so
Uh-huh.
I published that, and it took off. It got that number one search result, and I remember I got like 250,000 reads and maybe up to 500,000 at some point. And I was like, that's amazing.
Oh,
So I was super excited. I published other pieces. I remember I was talking to Sean McCoy, who's the head of support at chess.com. I traveled to a tournament. He also to the World Open. He also lived in Columbia, South Carolina. And we went to a tournament in the World Open together and were rooming together before I worked at chess.com. But had started to make connections with him and some other people at chess.com. And I remember at the World Open, I was thinking about how you would cheat if you wanted to cheat in an open.
uh-huh.
Um, and I remember like after one of the rounds, I told Sean, I'm going to write a piece on how to cheat in chess. And I bet I get 10,000 reads in like 3 days or something. And so I did like at the World Open and such, but it was like, stories about how people had cheated and things like that. And obviously not, um, giving real tips in any way, just storytelling around the topic. But I remember I used the slightly clickbaity title, how to cheat in chess. So at least like the more educational piece I wrote was a top Google result and not the
I
ones
like
that are
that.
actually serious. But I remember I got that like 10,000 mark that I bet Sean that I could get pretty quickly. And I looked back recently and it has like 100,000 because people are still searching how to cheat at chess
I want to
a lot.
I feel like you should have
um,
done all catchable methods, like here you go,
yeah,
chess.com will catch you.
something like that. But anyway, like that was a lot of what I was doing for fun. And Danny Rynch reached out because these blogs were regularly on the top of the blogs page, and they needed a new writer. Like Peter Dockers and Mike Klein at the time couldn't do all of the writing, and they needed someone to step in. And I wrote some pieces for them. And Danny was like, this is really good. I remember he told me the first piece of feedback he gave was after I'd completed a piece. He was like, "You did really good at taking feedback. That's like the best thing. Like you get your first draft, and we gave you a bunch of feedback, and you addressed it super well, and so forth. And we love it. We'd like to work with you." They hired me. I was mostly writing. Then I did chess kid lessons. Then I did at some point I was like, hey, you don't have anyone doing social media consistently. Can I do it? And then I was the head of social media. And so through like for a couple of years, it was just me doing the social media. Um, and just building from there. So it's been a good time. I think it was really funny that Danny told me that because taking feedback's actually the thing I'm not good at,
Oh,
but he
really?
didn't know it at the time. I faked it. and we're always going back and forth about different things on the content side and such. But obviously, we've been working together for a really, really long time now,
And
and done a lot of great things together.
I've worked with you a little bit for chess.com too, and I think you're one of the most impressive people that I've worked with for chess.com because you're always so organized, I feel like, and you kind of know you have a good sense of what direction you want to go, right? So like if Danny's thinking one thing and you're thinking another, I could see that being a healthy balance of let's not just go with what one person thinks. Like let's find a good solution that both of us like. All right, we are back after the Zoom warning popped up on the screen. Sam, welcome back. Let's now shift gears and let's talk about tips for improving adult players. So most of the Chess Goals members tend to be adults. I would say age 25 to 65 is pretty common. A lot of them maybe
Mm.
only have, 30 minutes a day on average. They have kids, families, obligations. What are your tips for adults that want to get better at chess?
Um, I don't know if I necessarily have good tips for adults because everyone is very different. Some people are more structured, some people are less structured. My number one tip for absolutely every player at any level is to play a lot.
Hmm.
um, Absorb as much as possible, whether it's through play, through great books, etc. Um, and I would also mention to try to challenge bad habits. You know, you can easily invest time and build up habits that are not productive, right? If you're doing lots and lots and lots of puzzles, you are building pattern recognition. But if most of the time you get frustrated after a few seconds and you just put in the first candidate move, you're building a really bad habit to not actually calculate when it matters in a game,
Yeah.
right? So there's tons and tons of things like that. So I I mentioned before the most important thing is to enjoy the game. So I'm not suggesting that everything needs to be optimized for the, maximum possible improvement or like you know, the most perfect way that you could approach solving a problem in a game or anything like that, or the best possible time usage. Like it's ultimately a game. You're not going to be a pro. No offense
Right.
to everyone listening. It's important to enjoy it. But I think that while you're enjoying it, trying to avoid getting into very, very, you know, um, problematic traps and poor habits is helpful. I say that partially because I think a lot of adult improvers are stuck on some kind of a plateau. Maybe it's 1400, maybe it's 1600, 1800, 2000, etc. And for a lot of them, I think it's the bad habits that are the real problem. Like they know enough to be at a higher level, but they have spent so much time doing things a certain way, taking shortcuts on calculation, always playing the same structure in the same way and not seeing other ways that they could play that particular opening structure they have over and over. Whatever it might be, if you're, an intelligent person who enjoys chess and you're feeling stuck at 1600 and you've been there a long time, it's not that I think that you don't have the ability to get to 1800. It's just that you've built patterns that are holding you back, and that's really hard to change. Um, but the other thing, like I say, is I really do think that playing and absorbing as much as possible is really key. Um, a lot of people talk about different study plans and ways that you should invest your time to improve and how much time you should spend each week doing this thing or that thing. I have a feeling that if you looked at the superstars of improvement, the massive chess prodigies, Ali Reza, Gukesh, etc., and you looked at the number of games they'd played, either on chess.com, many like Ali Reza have just tens and tens of thousands at a very young age, and that's a factor. Or if it's more serious games like Gukesh much prefers classical, plays a ton of tournaments, or has spends a lot of time doing deep calculation exercises. Like it's a lot of time invested in blitz, classical, over the board tournaments, serious training problems, whatever it might be. It's just a lot of time investment. You can find people who've invested in different ways,
Yeah.
right? In blitz or in more serious play or other things, but it's a lot of time invested in just absorbing chess. Magnus Carlsen as a young player, just tournament, just always having chess books around, all of those things. Um, I can also observe this for myself. I recently hit a peak rating at chess.com on Blitz of 2,500,
I
which for
saw that.
me,
Congrats.
I'm not, thank you. I'm not really a Blitz specialist at all. And I have not had, I wrote a post about like some things that I did to help get there. Like I had a spreadsheet where I was tracking results. I did put in some work on a repertoire that was more focused on Blitz. But I really think that the biggest thing was that I was just playing more. In the last couple of years, if you look at my account, I've just been playing more. When we launched leagues on chess.com, I was focused on leagues and I enjoyed that a lot. And to just get more games in, because that's how you advanced in leagues, I started playing on my phone a lot more. And
Okay.
I was losing a lot because I was playing on my phone. Also, I have kids now. So just being able to pull out my phone and play makes a difference. And my rating took a step back for a while, but getting over the feeling that I needed to be like serious when I was playing and just being like, whatever, I'm going to whip out my phone and I'm going to play a 3-0 game.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do this often. And sometimes I'm going to play like, a dozen games sitting on the couch here next to my daughter who's playing Minecraft on the tablet. Like that has just like tripled, quadrupled the number of games that I've played. And I think that's the biggest reason I've been at a peak rating, and still way higher than I've been on average in past years.
Yeah.
It's not quality training, but it has an impact. That's my perspective and experience, at least.
I mean, I think that matches all the things that I've seen looking at chess improvement data. So we had that
Mm-hmm.
survey at Chess Goals where it was like 400 people logged all their hours on all the different activities, like how often did you play, tactics, puzzles, blitz, bullet, review games, blah, blah, blah. Like we'd asked everything. And the number one tip I've found is just play more chess. The number two tip is
Yep.
review your games, which kind of goes back to what you're saying. Like try to break your bad habits, have takeaways from every single game. If you tend to trade your queen too often, try to stop doing that. Try to catch yourself. If you only do the minority attack in the Carlsbad structure, maybe branch out a little bit. Learn some other
Yep.
plans in those systems or how to counter a Carlsbad minority attack from the other side, like those kind of things. I think you're right. Play a lot
I,
of games and don't make it the perfect scenario. You don't have to be at your
mm,
desktop, wide awake with your coffee before a certain time of the day. Like you said, just pull out your phone. Who cares if you lose a few games with rating? Doesn't matter in
a
the long term.
1,000%. I don't want to acknowledge publicly exactly how many games I've played on the toilet, but it is not an insignificant number.
Nice. Okay, Kramnik.
Sorry. Uh, it's a bit of a rabbit hole. I wouldn't touch on it too much, but I remember having a debate with someone who was um, at chess.com, who's no longer here, did a lot of good things, but we were debating a bit how we could get people more into the chess.com lessons product, which millions of people have used to learn the basic rules of the game and basic strategies and such. And I think that's amazing, right? Because playing is really good, but knowing that there's a thing called a fort is also really helpful. Like it having certain patterns that you can put a name to, that you've been explained in a compelling way by a good coach, like that really helps. But I remember there was a theory that more people would improve faster and thus have a better experience if we could get them to play a little less, go from playing into lessons. So we could recommend more lessons after games and things like that and be like, hey, have you checked out the lessons? And so they'd pick that up. They'd feel like they were getting better. They'd see it in the rating and other things. And that would be motivating. And that would just create a better experience and help more people who log into chess.com and try some games to
Mhm.
come back. Because we have a lot of great members on chess.com. We also know that every single day there are tens of thousands of people who download the app, sign up, play a few games, lose those games, and
Yeah.
immediately leave and
You
never come back, right? I might be exaggerating a little bit the dynamic, but it's a common dynamic. But I remember debating that the key wasn't getting them into lessons. Like that's good and that can be beneficial, but the fastest way to improve is if they keep playing a little more and they push through that experience of it's hard to beat, some of the bots the first time. You don't know all the rules yet and other things like that. But if they get in that loop of playing, doing some game review afterwards, which is very common, like people who get into that, they're starting to step up really quickly. And I think that that's been our general observation. Like if you get in and you start playing more and more, there are going to be setbacks, but you're going to keep improving.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think one thing that I've noticed looking at some of the data is when you're a beginner, it makes sense to play, let's say, 90% of your chess time being playing games and 10% sort of
Hmm.
game review and studying lessons and stuff. As you approach, let's say, master, FIDE master level, that might be 50-50, where it's just as important to do your study as it is to play. And I think there's kind of a linear trend between those two ratings where you kind of always want to play at least 50% of your chess time, I think, if you want to optimize your chess improvement. But yeah, as a beginner, I don't think you want to spend too much time just watching videos. You really need to play, and you probably need to win a fair number of games so that you're still having fun in the beginning too. Like not get paired up with people way above your level in the beginning.
Yeah. I kind of like that 50%. I don't know that I'd go 90% just because I think there's a lot of good stuff for you to enjoy out there, including Gotham chess videos and other stuff. And when you're first learning, being exposed to people talking about the game and other things really helps. It unlocks a lot of ideas that you can piece together. Like it's a nice feedback loop to be playing really
Yeah.
consistently and watching other people talk about the game and picking up things that then you get to feed into the games and then you go and watch and you can have a really good feedback loop. So I recommend a good balance. I definitely think play is really important. The idea that you should go study up like you're going to bulk up all your muscles and then go into the fray. Like that's never going to pay off. Like
Yeah.
some people I hear a lot of people say, I don't want to play a tournament yet. I want to train a lot first. And it's like that's not gonna
Right.
that's not going to typically go well. And probably you're never actually going to do the tournament because you're building it up too much in your mind.
You might be the exception though. Starting at 1700, when I heard that, I was like, back then that never happened. Like you had to play the
I
tournament
would
first.
probably have had a bit of a better trajectory or peak rating if I could have gotten into tournaments when I was like 10 or
That's
6 or
true.
something. It's a cool first rating. It makes a nice story, but it starting that late, I don't think could have helped me achieve, my best potential necessarily.
Yeah, makes sense. Let's shift gears a little bit, Sam. So you've done a lot of work on kind of looking at historic chess players. I think you're kind of like a chess history enthusiast, is one way to put it. I want to pick your brain on a topic
Okay.
that I've heard many people debate. Is it Magnus? Is it Fischer? Is it Gary? Um, who is your greatest chess player of all time? And if you want to expand it, who would you say are just kind of in general, the top players of all time? How would you rank them?
I feel like my answer is pretty uncreative here because people pretty much cite the big three, Fischer, Kasparov, Carlsen. Um, I know Carlsen still says Gary. Uh, I have come around to believing Carlsen has established himself as the GOAT. Um, Obviously, they're both just tremendous players. It's easy to forget just how big Gary's peak was, hitting like 2850 when everyone else was way behind him.
Right.
There were not other 2800s. And his biggest tournament successes are amazing. Also, when we talk about GOAT, a lot of times we talk about results, which is fair, but best games is something I still care about a lot. And Gary played so many beautiful masterpieces, like just incredible gems of strategic and positional chess that you really benefit from study. Carlson's style is way different. Obviously, there's a lot of positional understanding there, but in many cases, it just feels like he's a little stylist in some ways,
Yeah.
just that it's best move, best move, best move. Like the best move has no style, sort of. And so you don't see that kind of risk taking at times from Carlson, but it's incredible that for so many years he goes into tournament after tournament after tournament. He has like the most active calendar of any world champion ever. And you can take him against the field over and
Yeah.
over and over again. And if you could bet Carlson against the field in like every tournament he played going back to when he became world champion or before, like you would make so much money. That's
Yeah.
insane,
I remember
you
that.
know?
All the betting odds, it'd be like he's over 50% to win every single tournament. He's somehow over 50%.
It's It's shocking. It's absolutely incredible. It's only like the World Cup when you have like 128 players that you might not feel like you should take Carlsen over the field. But I mean, in like the World Rapid and Blitz, there's so many players.
Yeah.
You're still making money taking Carlsen when he's playing against the field. How can you do that?
And he does it
It's
across formats.
insane.
Like he's doing
Yeah.
blitz, bullet, rapid, classical, freestyle. Like he does it all online, over the board. Yeah.
Yeah. Stunning. So that's all three of them are incredible, though. Like, if you talk about Carlsen that way, it's amazing. If you talk about the way Fischer went 6-0, 6-0 against Taimanov and I'm blanking Larson, that's insane. Like, what the hell?
Yeah.
No
Right.
draws, you know? Uh, just that run that he had into 72. And I always love Fischer's style. His best games, like my 60 memorable games, that's only like through what, 63 or 64. And he has many beautiful games after that. Incredible. Absolutely incredible. You know, Kasparov, there's so many things to say, but just his game in 1999 against Topalov, the greatest game of all time. The fact that there's millions and millions and millions and millions of games, so many brilliant ones. And I think we have a pretty clear consensus as to what is the greatest game of all time is incredible. And I cannot dispute the magnificence of that game. It's just absolutely stunning throughout. So those three deserve to be there, just absolutely no question. There's so many other great players. You know, you don't have to be a grandmaster necessarily to have wonderful games. Nizhmetdinov has an incredible game library. I love game collections written by the player.
Mhm.
I feel like, you know, so many players who are active masters, FIDE masters, international masters, if they published a best games collection, it'll be packed with gems, right? Like
It's true. Yeah.
there's a lot of wonderful chess. Chess is rich. At any rating, if you're playing competitive games, there's going to be moments where you dig in and there's stunning ideas beneath the surface, you know? Um, so I just love chess. I think you can enjoy chess from almost anyone. Like I even feel like if I had like a best games collection, like no one would read it, but I've played a lot of games. There's still good games in there and cool combinations and fun things sometimes that I didn't find the beautiful mating finish on or something like that. But chess is great content, you know, at any level. And if you're in there, you're really fighting and risking things against opponents. There's going to be some wonderful ideas and some cool things to share.
Yeah. And I think if you did write a best games book or video series, people would watch because there's something about grandmaster games where the level is so high, unless you're looking at, older games. The level is so high. Like seeing how Carlsen beats Caruana, it's a beautiful game, but it doesn't really apply to the 2000 level player. But seeing how a 2200 Sam
Mm.
Copeland beat a 2200 other player in South Carolina over the board, like you could probably apply more of those things to your own game with detailed analysis. So I think you should do it, Sam. I think at some point when you have time, you should do a greatest
Well,
games collection.
I'm looking at my best games on my blog or YouTube, whether or not I have an audience, and I do have some people who watch, and that's incredible. Today, I actually played what I think is my new best game, a daily chess game. I got to sack my queen. I got 5 brilliant moves in like 27 from the game review, 99% accuracy. I will share it with you. Maybe we could put a link or something,
Let's do that.
but I will definitely be covering that one because that was an absolute blast. Um, but yeah, I really think, just chess is super, super rich across levels. I think you mentioned that people might learn more from a game that I play because it's more relatable, or other masters play. Um, I liked an article that Yasser Seirawan wrote on Chess Cafe. People may not remember that, but that was a site that hosted some great articles, and I really enjoyed reading it for a while. He wrote a piece one time about um, the celebration of the crush. I don't I don't remember how he
Oh.
phrased it exactly, but the idea of just a crushing victory, that the most instructive games aren't the ones where you have like Carlsen versus Nepomniachtchi and it's like 80 moves and super sophisticated. It's when Carlsen plays an IM in the Norwegian Chess League and just demolishes him. Like that, just when you see like an executed kingside attack where the opponent was never in the game. Like that's really instructive. It gives you the template to try and play that kingside attack, or an end game where someone just pounds on a weakness.
Yeah.
At the very top level, it's rare that stuff is one-sided, but one-sided stuff is really instructive. It's just very relatable. It's hard to put into play in your own games, but you know what you're going for, and that's super compelling.
Yeah, I like that too. And I think that's something that we try to do. We have a couple courses, Beating Beginners Move by Move.
Mm,
It's sort of modeled after the
nice.
Chernev book, Logical Chess Move by Move, but it's games between two beginners. And I've specifically went for ones that are like pretty smooth games, where it's like,
Mm,
okay, you encourage the opponent to make a mistake, they make a mistake. How do you capitalize on it? How do you convert that to the end game? Because like you said, like that's the goal. Like we just want those super smooth games, and if everything goes right, the chart should kind of just look like this, right? It just should go up.
yep.
Okay,
I
so
My next series on YouTube, actually, which I'm working on now, I don't think it's going to get a lot of views, but that's fine. Anyone who's interested, check it out, and hopefully it's a good time, and I will enjoy creating it. I will, because it's 2025. We're a quarter of the way into this century. I want to look at like the top 50 positional masterpieces because we talk about all the attacking masterpieces. I want to look at the positional masterpieces, and I want to do like the Chernev book. Maybe I won't go move by move specifically, but like that kind of look at gems by Carlson, Rajabov, Dominguez, etc. All kinds of really beautiful stuff. And I've been putting games together for a bit. I've got like maybe 40 that I really like. So at some point this year, I'll get started on that, and I'm looking forward to it.
send us a link to that too, because we have our email list, and it's been growing. It's probably about 8 or 9,000 people now. We'll
Wow.
email blast it
Awesome.
out, and we'll get people to come check out those games. I think that'd be really cool.
Sounds
Okay,
good.
so what do you think for top young players? Who do you have coming out as sort of the next Magnus, or next number one ranked player in the world?
I My suspicion is that we won't have a as clear of a number one as Magnus has been. It has been Magnus number one, and then people cycling into number two. I mean, Caruana, I think, has spent more time at number two than others, and had the closest peak to Magnus. Um, but it's been Magnus. Between Kasparov and Magnus, there was a lot of turnover and competition between Kramnik, Anand, Topalov, um, and Shirov at some points. I think that the next cycle is a lot more complicated, that it's Gukesh and Prague and Arjun and other players who are not some of the Indian talents. Erdogmush from Turkey, maybe Faustino Oro really takes off. You know, Merzin, who just won the Rapid Championship. I don't know, but I think that it's going to be competitive, and we're not going to have one player at the top, which I don't know if that's the best thing for chess, just in the terms of a chess um, impact in the media. Having a clear number one in Kasparov and a clear number one in Carlsen, I think has been what has connected more people with chess in the 90s and 2010s. Like that's something that people can relate to, and I think a much more complex landscape is a bit more challenging for people to pick up. So I don't know what the larger implications are, but I think that's what we're going to see. Who knows? Maybe Gukesh gets to 2,900 and is far and away ahead of everyone else, but I just think that the other players are too competitive. I think, I don't think Gukesh is running away with it over Prague and all of the other talents out there.
I think
Gut
it'll
instinct.
I think it'll at least be exciting just to have something fresh, right? We've gone through having Magnus for so long be the clear number one. I think,
Mm,
give us a stretch. Maybe we go 10 years where there's four young players all fighting for that number one, and then maybe one of them emerges and they're the next Magnus. Because it was kind of interesting between Kasparov and Carlsen, like seeing that non-Topolov, Shirov
mm.
era, Kramnik. I mean, that was kind of interesting just to have the different players bounce up and down. And we've seen that in tennis. Like there was that stretch, right, where there was the three top tennis players that were
Mm,
winning everything, but they all still had their fans and people were interested to see who would win each of those Grand Slam events. But I think you're missing
that's
one
true.
player. What about the first
Which one?
American world
Alireza?
champion?
Hans. Fair enough.
Where do you think he'll fall?
Uh, who knows where Hans's legacy is going to be the most interesting. Whether or not he becomes the first American world champion. Um, he when things were developing with Singfield Cup and all of the discussions afterwards, and obviously at chess.com, you know, like there's a part of that that's that I'm involved in terms of the coverage and things like that. No, it's all super complicated. I know Danny's spoken at length about it and has probably going to have a lot more. He's got a book coming out. There's a Netflix Untold documentary coming out. Um, my feeling is I remember playing Hans at the World Open in like 2017. I was fortunate enough to win that game. He was maybe 13 or 14 in a FIDE Master. When he, in like 2020, ahead of the game against Carlsen at Singfield Cup, shot from like International Master and like mid 2400s, which kind of felt, where he was at for a bit to 2700, that was shocking to
Yeah,
me. And um, I don't know that a lot of people appreciate how absolutely shocking that was because you can look at some of the development of players and say like, oh, I can pick out maybe like Gukesh is kind of similar and so forth. But Hans was like not yet a GM at like 17, and then he shot to 2,700. There are a lot of strong IMs at 17 who do not take off. Like it's extremely rare that you're established good strong IM at that period and you're going to make it into the absolute elite. Like 2,400 2,700 is an incredible barrier. And every rating point is harder as you go higher, right? Like,
right.
to go from 2,400 to 2,500, incredibly difficult, right? But then to go from 2,500 to 2,600, that's just five, six, seven, eight, I don't know, 10 times harder. You could do the analysis to go from 2,600 to 2,700. That is just a massive, massive challenge. And so for Hans, as a pretty established player who'd been fairly consistent in terms of where he was at on a rating level to shoot up that 250 points and so many spots in the world rankings at that spot was just stunning. And, you know, there's obviously an insane dialogue afterwards with Magnus stepping out at the Singfield Cup and all of the things that are around that. Um, and I know Danny was on a podcast recently and was talking about how there were many mistakes made at that period. Agreed. But I understand the skepticism just because it is literally a difficult path to believe for Hans. That said, Magnus and all of the top players I know at this point, with Hans being well into 2,700, having played a lot more tournaments in stable conditions, having played some more super tournaments and things like that. I know he's still frustrated with invitations, and understand where he's coming from there, but just more and more chances to show himself. Like no one's disputing that he's well into the 2700s now, that he really has made that incredible breakthrough, and kudos to him on that.
Mm.
Um, I don't know if he'll get into the top 10. It feels like his trajectory's been strong enough that he might make it. You know, for me as a master level player, for you as a master level player, it's really hard to to process. It still seems like it's challenging for a player to break into the top 10. He's got quite a bit more work to do, right? It's not just that you have to show that you are a strong player, it's you have to show that you're a stronger player than these other incredible players. Like you
Yeah.
have to win games against your Gukesh's, Progs, and like Dinglirens and so forth, right? And that's really, really tough. But it feels like he has the potential and momentum to break into the top 10. Much beyond the top 10, that'd be, I think, really challenging. But who knows? You know, any player who's made it that far can certainly achieve incredible things. So his journey is going to be super exciting to continue to watch.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with everything you said there too. I think I helped make a chart for chess.com where it was
Mm,
looking at the juniors and we kind of pegged them all to similar ages and see how much they gained. And I think Hans was number 1 and maybe there was one other player, one of the Indian players was kind of close to his trajectory.
yeah,
But Hans was like the clear, like no one else is, gaining all those points at a certain age at that rating, like you said, because it's exponentially gets harder every 100 points. One thing that I was
yeah.
thinking though is if you watch Hans
I
play
think,
Blitz, he's
yeah,
he's
to
got
be clear,
this.
like Hans is an anomaly.
Yeah,
Like setting aside all of the drama, I think it's just an objective fact that Hans is an anomaly. So
yeah.
kudos to Hans. And I think it's just a fascinating player in case. Sorry, you were saying.
I was just saying if you look at how he plays Blitz, he's got this like resiliency factor that
Mm,
I've only really seen in Magnus and Hikaru. So like let's say Magnus is playing, I don't even want to pick on anybody, but someone else in the SCC that's not named Hikaru or Hans.
mm,
Once Magnus gets an advantage, like say he's up a pawn, Stockfish is saying like +2, he mostly just cruises to victory. Same with Hikaru. If Hikaru is not playing Magnus or Hans, he can kind of just cruise to victory in those situations. But those same two guys, Magnus and Hikaru, when they're down, when they're -2, they
mm-hmm.
fight back like crazy. They're so resourceful. They find all these moves. People have trouble putting them away in those games in Blitz. I find that Hans does that same thing. He's the only other
Wow.
person I think that's close to those two, which I think makes him unique and, might be sort of this wild card factor. Like he just has a different style and potentially I could see him being number 1 at some point, but I agree with you. I think he'll probably settle in around 10th in the world somewhere at that point.
Who knows? And that observation also is about Blitz, right? And then
Right.
classical is its own beast. Obviously, he's super strong at both. I think breaking through in classical is just much harder. Like there's fewer games, fewer opportunities. Opening theory is a bit of a leveler. Some other things. It's just, much more challenging. You can go online, chess.com, and play a ton of games and move your rating quite a lot in the space of a week. And it's much more difficult in the classical situation.
Yeah, I agree with that too. It's a different beast playing classical versus playing online blitz. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit, Sam. Outside of chess, what do you like to do for health and fitness or like longevity, that kind of thing? We Jesse and I talk about this kind of stuff all the time, and we saw recently Magnus Carlsen's genes that caused all the drama were purchased by Peter Attia, who's an
Mm.
MD that uh, has a book on longevity called Outlive. So, what are your thoughts on those topics?
Um, yeah, I saw that too. I've seen some of Peter Attia's YouTube videos. He seems like an incredible uh, person and you know creator in this kind of health and fitness space, and I got the book because people were recommending it after the auction and him purchasing Magnus's gene. So I've been listening to that on my runs, which
Nice.
I go for runs regularly. There's some state forests around where I live, and I really like to be able to run outside. I've done a marathon and a half marathon. I try to do a couple of half marathons a year. I don't think I'm ever doing a marathon again because the
Fair.
amount of training running it just doesn't fit in with family life. But with regular daily running, I can go and do a couple of half marathons a year and enjoy that. I don't really worry about my time. I just try and go out and, you know, vibe for 13 miles. um, I also have been doing more swimming. I do a lot of New Year's resolutions. Each year I write like 40,
Oh,
and then I
wow.
achieve maybe 50 to 75%, something like that. And I never intend to achieve them all. Like a lot of the ones that I don't make, I'll roll over next year, and I might be able to achieve it next year. It's just a way for me to set some goals I have and move in the right direction year over year and keep building. And I have my New Year's resolutions dating back to like 2012 in a folder
It's so organized.
in Google Docs, and I can go back, and that's kind of an amazing way for me to look back. But I have a goal this year to swim 100 miles, so that's like 2 miles a week. So I typically go on Mondays and Fridays, and I've been mixing that in. I like being able to mix some running, some swimming, like some push-ups. I got an app that tracks daily push-ups. You put it down on the floor and you do your push-ups, and it counts for you, which I'm
Oh,
terrible at counting while I'm doing push-ups. So I like
that's cool.
that. And it gives you like your little chime when you hit your 50 push-ups and so forth. So I do some of those things on the fitness side. And then yeah, you know, chess is also my hobby. And then I like cinema. I'm into musicals. That's a big thing for me. My wife and I are seeing Broadway for the first time this spring. We've got tickets, and we're going to fly out for the weekend
Oh, cool.
and see a couple of Broadway shows. So that's something I'm really, really excited about because we love being able to watch pro shots we can get on DVD and other things and listen to soundtracks. And I've not ever been able to make it to Broadway directly. So that's a big life achievement for me.
So you found someone to watch the kids and you get to experience that?
My parents. we
Nice.
live we live in the same town as both our parents. We're a bit away, like 30 minutes or so, but it's really helpful to have parents around who can watch the kids and give you some opportunities away.
That's cool. Do you also cycle? Because you're only one sport away from a triathlon, right?
I've done a triathlon. I uh, did an aquathlon last year, which is everything but the cycling.
Oh,
The reason I don't do the cycling is because I know three people who have died cycling. Um, and when I did it, I felt unsafe on the roads in South Carolina. It's not a super bike friendly place, but even when I've been in other places, it just feels like there's not enough safe space for cycling. And it disillusioned me enough to where I was like, you know what? There's no reason for me to do this just to fill out a triathlon. I'm just going to focus on the running and swimming. The only reason I tried the cycling for a bit was because a triathlon felt like a thing to do. But the cycling was not the part I enjoyed, and it felt scary and risky, and I gave it up, to be honest. And I have no intentions to to get back.
that's completely fair. I mean, whenever I see cyclists on the side of the road, I kind of think that, how close the cars are whizzing by. But then also when you get a lot of bikes all in a big group, like I had a coworker that used to like to watch the Tour de France, and one year I got into
Mm,
it. And you see some of those wrecks when people are going all out and, wheel to wheel racing. Like, yeah, that doesn't seem
yeah.
safe at all.
Yeah. Cars are scary enough for me. There's enough people who die in car accidents, so
Right.
I'll keep to a car.
What about so kind of thinking back to self-help books. This is something that Jesse and I talk about all the time. What kind of self-help books are you into?
Um, I listen to self-help books fairly often because I listen either to self-help or nonfiction when I go for runs. And there are some that I've liked. A lot of times I feel like I just take a little bit here, a little bit there. I don't know that there's one I'm like, well, this is amazing, and it's radically changed my worldview.
Yeah.
It's more like I take an idea here and slot it in and so forth. One that I will say I did like a lot was Extreme Ownership, which I know is super, super popular, by Jocko Willnick, talking about just it comes through the military lens because they were in Iraq. And so that's part of the perspective. There's a lot of war stories that are a part of that. To be entirely honest, I have mixed feelings about that side of things because I have no good feelings about the Iraq war. And any kind of war situation is very complex, even when like the good guys and bad guys are clearer. Like people are just caught up in a meat grinder.
Yeah.
Um, but I also understand, it's the situations there, right? That are fascinating. Like they're in life and death situations. The context in which he's talking about ownership and different leadership principles and such is very tangible. And I like the way he lays out a number of things. And just the philosophy of stepping into any space as though you can lead it and really demonstrate that ownership over anything in life, family life, work life. It can also be that you're not the leader, like I use this when I think about working at chess.com, and working with other leads. Like sometimes ownership in my space is just being able to clearly outline what like me and my team are working on and being able to give that in a really clear documented way to Eric or Danny. Um, and I can lead by giving them the best context as to what we're working on or different things. But it's hard for me to fully describe it. So if people are interested in that one and they haven't checked it out yet, I think it is very, very much worth checking out. There's some sequels that I've listened to that I'm not as crazy about. They lean more towards the war story side, I think, and don't necessarily add as much in terms of new perspective. But I can heartily recommend that particular one. So there are a lot of other books, and I generally feel like you can always get something from
Yeah.
something from a good book, right? Even if you don't agree with the perspective, you're still learning to think about what your perspective is and how it might differ from that of the author, and that's compelling.
I'll have to check that out. So, Extreme Ownership: How U.S. Navy SEALs Lead and Win. Um, yeah, that sounds interesting. I find a lot of
Sounds
self.
a little more rah than I promise it comes through. It does. It is. I think if the title or context turns you off a little bit in terms of like, feeling like rah, I think if you get into it, um, the the advice is much more relatable. But I've not heard anyone who's listened to it who doesn't have a very, very strong and positive experience.
That's cool. One thing I like to do is I'll use Chat GPT to summarize the old
Uh,
self-help books that I've read. Like, can you remind me, give me 10 actionable takeaways from this book? But I find
mm,
a lot of self-help books, you can also ask Chat GPT, hey, how can you apply this book to chess improvement? And it'll come up with some
mm,
pretty creative ideas. Like maybe for this book, it might say, the situation you're in on the chessboard isn't the worst scenario in the world, and, look for resources. I mean, who knows what it is, but like it'll come up with some kind of
yeah,
creative, cool ideas.
I haven't tried that yet. That's really clever.
Yeah, thanks. I use ChatGPT way just for random things way too often, I think. Okay, so we've
Learning a bit more about how I can fit in AI, but I'm still stuck at the AI has ruined my life because Google replaced Google Assistant on my phone, which worked wonderfully with Gemini, which is a piece of crap.
oh no,
So,
I've read about
but
that.
honestly, that there's obviously like more and more things every day that are pluses, and I think I'm most impressed. Like we're on a Zoom call right now, but on Google Meet, they've built Gemini in for note taking, and it does a great job. and I really like that. And I'm picking up other places where I'm able to benefit from AI and finding some cool opportunities.
Do you have a Google Pixel then?
Yeah, I got the I have a fold. I'm excited. I was waiting
Oh,
for a really good fold because the idea really excited me, but I didn't like the Samsung ones. So when they hit the second generation with Google, I was like, that's the upgrade I've been waiting for.
so it
And I
opens
love
up.
it.
Just is it like two screens? It opens up. Oh, that's super cool.
It makes it so much easier to A, play a chess game. Like I
Yeah.
told you, I was playing on my phone, and that I was playing on like just a normal phone previously until I got the in fall. But now, like this is way better. Like the fold experience is square and it fits a chessboard excellently.
So you have a
So
tablet.
yeah, small tablet. That dimensions are a little weird for like watching videos and such, but for reading a book or for playing chess, it's fantastic. And in my pocket, it's the size of a normal phone. And uh, I have been loving this, and if you're looking for a new phone, I mean they are a bit more expensive, but I think it's well worth it. So I was excited. I've been waiting since the idea of a fold was available, but I was like, I don't think this version one is right. I don't think this version two. I don't want to be is right. I don't want to be the early adopter, but I think that they're there now for people who like that idea.
I might have to look into that because I have a Pixel 5a right now, and it's kind of on
Mm,
the. Oh yeah, I can just tell it's losing battery life a little quicker, different things. But I do like Google phones, and I like the call screening that they do, which I don't think you
mm.
can even really get that level of call screening on an iPhone. You know, where it'll give you Google Assistant and says who's calling, blah blah blah, and they have to like leave a message, and it shows you the transcript and all that stuff.
I have excellent call screening. All I do is never answer the phone.
Same.
And instead, I just get texts and emails, and it's perfect.
Yeah. All right, Sam. So we've been a little over an hour now. Great conversation. Are there any other items like projects that you have coming down the pipeline or chess.com projects that you want to talk about before we wrap up? Things you're excited about?
Let me um, plug one thing, I guess.
Okay, good.
I have a YouTube. You can check it out. I don't post as much as I want to, but I enjoy when I can, and I blog and I'm on Twitter and trying to move a bit more to blue sky
Okay.
instead. A little bit better experience. But the one thing I'd mention for people who are looking to improve, check out the Improvers Club at chess.com. We launched a 2025 chess improvement challenge at chess.com. It is just a place that you can set out your goals for 2025 and then join our Improvers Club, which has more than 30,000 members, and just participate in discussions about improvement, share games, ask questions of coaches, all kinds of stuff. It's been one of the best communities we've created. I love seeing the interactions in the club. My favorite forum in the club is the achievement forum, where people are just sharing like their brilliant moves or their new best wins and
Cool.
all kinds of things. I like that positivity. So there's a lot of good things there, and you probably will not publish this before we get it announced on chess.com. So we're very close to announcing coach champs, where people who are in the improvement challenge will be able to be paired with coaches later this year for a tournament where we see who the best chess coach is and we give improvers a chance to shine. So it's going to lead to lots of great discussion about improvement. There's all kinds of cool things. I know we've also talked about doing an article looking at some of the data that we have from the members, like what goals did they set? How did those pay off? Like what goals were just, better predictors of who was really successful. So I am excited about that. Check it out, 2025 Chess Improvement Challenge. You can sign up. We're publishing all kinds of improvement content and doing fun stuff. So that should be of interest to to this audience.
Yeah, definitely. I love it. It's like the year of improvement for chess and chess.com. Well, thank you, Sam. This was awesome having you on. Jesse normally does the outcast, but it's something outro, but it's something like give us likes and reviews and comments on Spotify, Apple playlists, wherever you listen to this. Tell your friends. Thanks everyone for listening. This was, no pun intended, episode number 62. and we will see you next time.